Hi, welcome to the video called Who's Who in the Zoo. Today, we'll look at the core key players involved in starting and running a project. We'll introduce some important terminology and look at some typical examples of how projects can operate. We'll also look at the various roles and how they interact with the iron triangle of cost, time, and quality. At the end of the video, we'll also briefly look at which roles you should look at in your assignments. Let's get straight into some of the key roles. First off, we have a client. They are the people or organisation who starts the project in the first place. Generally, they come up with the idea and they're the people who will benefit at the end. Then we also have a sponsor. In project management land, this is a specific term that has a specific meaning. The sponsor is normally an individual who works for the client organisation. They are a senior member of that organisation who has enough authority to approve the project starting to make sure the project gets enough money and support to keep it going. It is not an advertising or a financial sponsor. Some clients might hire an external project manager from another company to be their representative to act on their behalf. This is common if the client organisation doesn't run projects very often or if the project is bigger than normal. We would call this project manager a client representative or the PM client rep. Then the client or their client rep might also hire design or technical advisors or consultants. In construction, these would be called design consultants, such as an architect or engineers. In other industries, they could be technical consultants or advisors. They give specialty expertise that the client doesn't have themselves. It's also common for a client to hire one main contractor to complete the work during the implementation phase of the project. This contractor could be called the head contractor or the main contractor, both very common terms in construction and engineering, or they could be called a prime contractor, which is a common term in many other industries and government projects. That main contractor could also hire their own designers or technical consultants. They will definitely also hire other companies to help them with smaller portions of the work, and we would call these subcontractors or suppliers. There are lots of ways to further define these roles, but this is covered in other courses. For this course, it's enough for you to know what the roles are generally. There are also lots of other people indirectly involved in the project, and we call these people stakeholders. They're really important, and we'll talk more about them in a video later on in the course. So now let's look at a few different examples. Example 1, a residential construction project. A family decides that they want to build a new house. So they come up with the idea and they are the driving force behind the project. So they are the client. The family gets a loan from a bank, but don't be tempted to think that the bank is now the sponsor. They're not. The bank is just a funding source. The family is still the client and the parents would be considered the sponsor. They approach some local residential builders directly and decide to hire a builder who has a range of pre-designed standard houses. Because the house is already designed, the client doesn't need to have any other technical advisors like an architect. They just have the main contractor. Note also that the client, the family, does not need to hire a separate project manager to represent them. So that client rep role isn't needed in this project. The main contractor, though, would hire a number of companies to help them. They would hire a small number of technical consultants to finalise the design. No architect, probably, but likely an engineer to help do the engineering supports under the house, and probably a surveyor who will inspect the house when it's finished. They'll also hire subcontractors and suppliers who will do specialty work for them, such as plumbing or electricians. So, example 2, a large construction project. Let's say that the state government decides that a new hospital is needed. So they come up with the idea and get some funding approved. They are the client. There would be a senior person within that government department, so the Department of Health, who would support and authorise the project in the first place. It's such a big project that they hire some consultants and technical advisors. including a project manager client representative to coordinate everything on their behalf. Once the consultants and designers have done the large majority of the design, then they can go out to the construction industry and find a builder, so the head contractor. That head contractor might need some of their own technical advisors, or they might rely on the ones already hired by the client. The head contractor would also hire other specialist companies. These are the subcontractors and suppliers. Additionally, those subcontractors may likely have another level of subcontractors and suppliers underneath them, a little bit like a pyramid. So, example 3, an IT project. Let's say a private industry company, like a bank, decides they need a new IT solution to handle customer relationship management. They're the client, and some senior person from within the bank is the project sponsor. So the client, using their own internal resources, decides the requirements of the new software, so the must haves or the nice to have features. There are no external consultants involved here because the bank has enough expertise in house. But the bank then does go out to the market, and interested companies could provide a suggested solution back to the bank. The company that gets picked is now the prime contractor. That prime contractor uses their own staff to do the work, so there might not be any subcontractors or suppliers directly involved. Example 4, an events project. Let's say a local charity decides to hold a fundraising project to help a local school buy some new play equipment. The local charity would be considered the client, and the individual from within that charity who championed the idea would be the sponsor. The local school gets the final benefit of the cash and equipment, so they care about the project, of course, but they are not the client or sponsor. The people who make all the decisions and come up with the idea in the first place, i.e., the local charity, they are the client. The charity then decides to run the event themselves rather than hire an events management company. So there isn't going to be one main contractor. Instead, they hire a number of small contractors and suppliers directly. Hopefully, those projects showed you how each type of project would use the roles differently. There is no one size fits all in project management. So now let's have a look at how the roles affect the iron triangle priorities. Let's compare the priorities of the client to the priorities of some of their contractors. For example, the Olympics. What do you think the priority is for the client, i.e., the Olympic Committee or the federal government, in terms of cost, time, or quality? The top priority is time, right? They're not going to move the Olympics. After that, it's often quality and then cost. But if you're a contractor who has been hired to do a smaller portion of the work, your priority is probably more about cost or maybe quality. After all, if something outside your control has made you late, then why would you prioritize the timeliness of that project if it's not your fault or not really your problem? So another example, what about the priorities of the MyKey system in Victoria when it was rolled out? The Victorian government seemed to care the least about time, judging by all the delays. But the contractor would have cared much more about time because for them, longer time cost them more in salaries. The government seemed to prioritise the scope and the quality more than anything else. And the last item to talk about today is which role should you take in your assignments? Many of you will be tempted to take on a construction related project. If this is the case, it is a good idea for you to take on the role of the client. For example, if your project is to build a new building for RMIT, then pretend you are RMIT Property Services. Don't pretend to be a builder who has been hired by RMIT. Pretending that you are the client will help you focus more on the project management side rather than a technical side. It gives you more scope to look at, such as design and coordination, upfront feasibility, post-construction items like moving new staff into their offices, that sort of thing. But regardless of what industry or project type you choose, it is always a good idea in this course to take on the role of the client. So when you come up with your idea for your first major assignment, which sneaks up on almost every student every semester, think carefully about what role you are playing. We really want you to pretend that you are the client for the project and get into that mindset of being a project manager. And of course, last item, some quick refresh questions for you. So question 1, list out the 6 main roles we identified. Question 2, explain what is meant by the role project sponsor. And question 3, this might take you a bit, this one. Think about a project you've heard about recently in the news or one that you've been interested in, and think about the roles that were involved in that project. Do you think all the roles involved had the same priority in terms of the iron triangle, or were some of the priorities different between different roles? So have a think about that, and then come prepared, ready for the tutorial with some of those answers in your mind as well. Okay, well, thanks very much for listening today, and I will see you in your first tutorial in week 1. Thanks.